It's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello, so it's the end of the rapid game week sessions for a little while, giving us all a bit of a breather as the relentlessness slightly subsides. We're coming to you a day late this week, I'm afraid, due to my girlfriend's birthday yesterday, but that with a bang, we've got a fantastic pod in store for you. Now, Anthony, today, not that that's why we've got a fantastic pod, but he's away due to illness, not COVID, I should say. It's more of a dodgy dinner, it sounds like, past the toilet roll. But instead, we're joined for this one by former FPL winner and behavioural science academic Simon March, who you can find at March Simon on Twitter.
Yeah, thanks for having me back on. I'm Simon. I'm best known for winning FPL in 2015. When I'm not reminding people about me winning FPL in 2015, I write about FPL, usually from a behavioural science perspective.
Yes, welcome, Simon. Great to have you again on the pod. It's been a while, hasn't it, been since we last spoke and caught up, but hopefully at some point in the next year, we might actually be able to have another FPL-themed gathering in town. So we are, of course, Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Twitter at WGTA_FPL for Tom, at WGTA_Nick for myself, at FPL Stag for Stag as well, who's obviously not here today. And we're also on Instagram, WGTA.FPL. And if you want to join the mini league, the code is cpsulf. Apologies if my internet connection is a little bit dodgy, or my sound's a little bit dodgy. Got a few internet problems today. Not those 5G nutters again, just my normal connection. But hopefully it doesn't sound too bad. And yeah, no Anthony, as Tom alluded to, his excuse is not quite as wild as mine. So Tom's going to give us the agenda rundown. What's on the pod today?
Yep, so behavioural pod today, we're looking at a select few aspects which impact managers in FPL. There's no correspondence today because we've got some big topics to cover, such as chip strategies, among other things. So that bit of the pod is going to take a back seat. Obviously, it will return when Anthony does next week. But for now, it is the game reviews and the market forces. Let's start off with the game reviews. I think I'm first. So I got 61 this week. A little bit glad to see the back of these sort of mid-weeks. I think for a couple of weeks I was doing pretty well. And the last couple of weeks have been real sort of downers in some ways. Another 50k drop back to around the 500k mark. And as with the week before, it's been kind of those big template picks which have combined to really body me. This week I was particularly exposed to two individuals, Son Heung-min and James Justin, and they scored 20 points between them, which was great. And I also benched the Dominic Calvert-Lewin-Hall. Thomas Souček played in his stead, he got 0. And, without Gundogan's brace after this penalty, which would have been even worse, it could have been truly miserable this week. So 50k drop, it's not great, but I think I kind of did get away with it after being kind of exposed to quite a few big template picks. And obviously, Dallas made it worse on Monday night. It wasn't as bad as it could have been. But it is making me think more and more that I've got to kind of stanch the bleeding a little bit going forward, which is going to inform kind of my chip strategy, but not quite this week. But yeah, 61, 50k drop is basically the headline, even though my captain Fernandes did score. Nick, I think you're next.
Yeah, so I got 67 points. I think we were about on the same, weren't we, leading up to the Leeds game? It was Bamford versus Dallas, but Dallas struck gold again. 12 points for him, which was pretty good. But 67 points was actually a red arrow, which I can't believe. It was a 6k overall rank drop. And it just feels like so annoying to be treading water, I guess, this stage of the season. Last week, I got 79 points. This week, 67 points. Over those 2 weeks, I've literally just gone up 1k in overall rank, which just shows how tough the competition is this year with so many sort of picks doing well at the moment. But yeah, I think the main disappointment, I guess, was the Antonio captain fail. He blanked, which is very unfortunate. And Souček, he got the 0 pointer as well. But, quite a few guys did well for me, like Calvert-Lewin, Martinez, Dallas and Son, and who came in as well, and Sterling. I guess the sucker punch, the other sucker punch perhaps, was the Liverpool game with the double clean sheet wipeout for City, complete with a Dallas, with a Diaz yellow card, and that Salah penalty with that goal alone wiping out 20k of my rank. So that was a particularly galling turn of events, just that little moment. But otherwise, just a tiny red arrow, which I guess is a little bit disappointing. But Simon, you got 68 points there. Did you get a green arrow for the 68?
I did my first green arrow in quite some time. So clawing my way slowly back to respectability after I think my rank is halved twice 2 weeks running. Doubled rather. So
I was going to say that's a good thing.
Yeah. I think I only went up about sort of 6,000 or 7,000, but it's nice to have a green arrow, and got returns from Dallas, Salah, Fernandez as my captain, Sterling, and Calvert-Lewin. Calvert-Lewin was a really nice one actually, because I was watching the match, and with about 30 seconds left to go, I switched it off, and just thought, okay, I'll have to make do with an assist. Switched it back on about 10 minutes later, and saw a smiling Dominic Calvert-Lewin being interviewed, and he was losing 3-2 at the time I switched off. So what happened there? And sure enough, he'd scored a goal. So yeah, that was nice. It was worth 7 points in the end. But yeah, overall reasonably happy with that one.
Nice one. How are you doing the season overall?
Oh, awfully, terribly, really, really bad.
Not as bad as me, surely. 500k.
Yeah, worse. Yeah.
How the mighty have fallen, How the mighty have fallen.
It's absolutely true.
For me to goad you, I'm not a good manager.
Yeah, 583,000 I am at the moment. So.
I'm sure we can get it back. I'm sure you can.
I have to make do with second place this season. So.
Maybe. Right. Speaking of Calvert-Lewin, yes, I had the opposite. I switched it off and thinking, he's just got an assist, it's fine. And then came back to it about 5 minutes later, and I saw our Slack was for them. Calvert-Lewin, he scored. I was like, Anyway, and speaking of Calvert-Lewin, that segues us nicely onto the market forces, because the man himself is top of the market forces, isn't he, Nick? He's been transferred back in like it's game week 2.
Yeah, he's definitely a popular pick this week. 430,000 transfers in at time of recording, thanks to that goal and assist. Obviously, Everton have a double game week just approaching as well, so it seems like he's finding his form just in time for that. So yeah, no surprises there at all that so many people transferring him in. And obviously Gundogan as well, another very popular pick ahead of the double game week. Yet another brace from him. He's just doing so well, isn't he? Also involved in the captaincy conversation, I'm sure, and it's something we probably so surprised about at the beginning of the season, to expect Gundogan to do well. Otherwise, some interesting things happening with Kane and Son. So Kane's had 220,000 transfers in, third most transferred in player, but Son has had 125 transfers out, which is quite interesting to think about the reasons why. Obviously, Son actually outscored Kane this particular game week, but perhaps it's some of Son's poor form prior to that, and the fact Kane is coming back from injury that's exciting people, plus the congestion in the midfield compared to the forwards where we don't have as many options. Perhaps one of the reasons why so many people bring in Kane. Quite an interesting pick. And a few others. Foden being heavily bought in, 150,000 transfers in, and Ollie Watkins also catching the eye with 130,000 transfers in. Perhaps a straight swap there for Callum Wilson, who's the most sold at the moment, and Watkins actually is doing excellently at the moment with 4 goals in 5, so a little bit under the radar, that pick right now.
Yeah, but still, the likes of Antonio, who again hasn't featured tonight, not even in the squad. I guess also being a foil for the likes of Kane and Watkins to be bought in. But yeah, an interesting set of market data there, that's for sure. Right, let's move on to the main topic today, which is behavioural science. Let's give a quick explanation of what this is before we go any further. Yeah, Simon's got a master's degree in LSE in this subject, and I used to work for a behavioural science agency. I think it's one of the first things Nick and I thought we'd hero back in the day. But anyway, simply put, behavioural science or behavioural economics takes underlying principles of how humans behave according to economics and infuses them with irrationality, effectively. So trailblazers like Taylor, Kahneman, Tversky you may have heard of, lots of academic antecedents. They effectively took issue of pure economics as a view of how humans behave. So this view, pure economics that is that we're all econs. That is, everything we do is examined thoroughly. We weigh up all the outcomes and come to the best decision we possibly can through careful analysis of all of the evidence available to us to make ourselves into the best little economic unit we can possibly be, otherwise known as maximising utility. What the behaviouralists said, broad brushstrokes here, was simply, hey, that's not true. The human brain is an ascended animal one, effectively, designed for a simpler time when the barrage of messages, decisions we now make on a daily basis simply didn't exist. We're flawed, we're irrational, and as a result of all this information overload, we utilise shortcuts, heuristics and biases to help us navigate a cognitively complex world. Simon, what do you reckon? Is that about right academically?
Yeah, I think that's a great definition. Ultimately, I suppose, what it is the study of why people do what they do, why people behave in the ways that they do. And, as you mentioned, psychologists have found that people behave, predictably irrationally, or in predictably irrational ways, based on those biases which are hardwired into us. So if you can identify those biases, you can also design ways to help improve the way that people make decisions. And FPL is a really good arena for identifying those biases in practice, but also I think that behavioural science is also a very good way to improve your fantasy management.
Yeah, definitely. I think it can supplement what you do. It can help you understand and kind of put framework around what you see happening in front of you. And for the best managers, i.e. not me, and to some extent, give you the tools to help improve. Today, there are loads of things that we see in the FPL sphere in terms of behavioural science, as Simon mentioned. And you'll hear many of them sort of trumpeted throughout the FPL discourse, normally half understood, I might add, when we talk about FPL. So things like confirmation bias, outcome bias, we did the pod on that earlier this year, and sunk cost fallacy, a stick with which I love to hit analytics FC with. All of those have permeated the discourse to some extent. Today, we're going to home in on three: gamblers / hot hand fallacy, loss aversion, and satisfying versus maximizing in decision making. Let's move on to the first one, which is gamblers / hot hand fallacy. I'm going to have a go at doing gamblers, and I'm going to pass on to you, Simon, because I know hot hand is your thing. But in terms of gamblers fallacy, this is the notion that things in life are inherently fair and will even out. The analogy is of someone at a roulette table, and they're watching the ball land on red every single time, and they think to themselves, yeah, last few times it's landed on red, so next time it has to be black, right? Obviously, it's a fallacy. It's not true. Life isn't fair, and things don't inherently even out. So the gambler's entire notions were completely wrong. And hot hand fallacy, I guess Simon splits off from that, doesn't it?
Yeah, and in some respects, it's the inverse. It's the question of whether scoring once improves the likelihood that you'll score with your next attempt. So it's been studied for about 40 years now in an academic environment. It's been literally hundreds of studies looking at basketball, tennis, baseball, bowling, pretty much any sport that you could imagine. But it is very controversial, partly because it's one of these things that people just believe in. You believe it in your bones. If you play or watch or talk about sport, you just kind of assume that it does exist. And in football, we describe this effect as form, and it's talked about all the time. And it's assumed to be a real thing, that if a player's in form, they're more likely to produce positive results. So, more likely to score a goal. But the question remains, are they? Does that actually exist? Does that hot hand effect actually exist in football?
Yeah, we've seen plenty of examples in the past, haven't we? And we sometimes refer it as well on the pod as like a purple patch when a player just seems to be hitting that form and scoring week in, week out. And sometimes you get some quite interesting characters that emerge in FPL, sort of out of the blue. In the past, we've seen Etienne Capoue, a few seasons back, started off excellently and just kept scoring. And we were like, well, this guy's going to stop at some point. And the goals just kept coming for at least the first 10 or so game weeks of that season. Aaron Ramsey sort of emerging in the past as well. And this season, we've seen the rise of Gundogan, at least in the last 5 or 6 game weeks. He's kind of emerged out of the shadows, been at Manchester City now for about 5 seasons. Last season, for instance, he only actually scored 2 goals when he managed that in the last game. And then, he's had 9 goals now in 9 game weeks. So this guy has been on what you would refer to as a hot hand streak. But obviously, a few things have changed in terms of his positioning. The penalties as well, of course, helps, even though he missed one this particular game week. But definitely you see it quite a lot in FPL. These players that you just don't expect to kind of hit these sort of scoring runs, and ultimately, I think there is an element that is to do with hot hands. They're on fire, and we see it all the time as well in real life as well, even playing video games, for instance. I've gone through streaks on Call of Duty when I've just been doing excellently, and then then I'll go for like a whole evening of just playing dreadfully, regardless of what map or setting I play on. And I think we can certainly all relate to that.
Yeah, I think certainly in FPL terms and in football terms, there's always the sort of notion of form. And I know, does form exist as a whole other question, which we're not going to go into here in an analytic sense. But there is always kind of the drawback that humans are designed, or at least have come to see patterns in things to help you make sense of what's going on in front of you, where maybe actually sometimes none exists. But that being said, there are lots of examples Nick's mentioned, from Bruno Fernandes in the last calendar year, all the way back to an example of somebody like Michael Ricketts. Remember him at Bolton? He went on that ridiculous goal scoring run when he scored in every single game for what felt like about a year or so, and then spectacularly bottomed out, fell off the radar. So hot hand can definitely be felt to exist in FPL. I guess, Simon, though, how can people be mindful of hot hand in FPL and its effects, and what advice would you give them surrounding hot hand before we relate back to gamblers?
I did have a crack actually at figuring out whether form does exist in football. The first question that I wanted to answer was, does form exist? So what I looked at was a kind of specific group of players. I looked at the top 10 goal scorers from the past 10 Premier League seasons. And I looked at whether they scored more frequently in their next game if they'd scored in their previous game. And in doing that, I looked at thousands of events, 50 individual player seasons, 1,673 matches, almost 800 goals. In terms of the results, I found that players were not more likely to score in the next match after scoring in their previous match. And in fact, they were 20% more likely to not score in the following game after they'd scored in their previous game. So score then a blank. It was 20% more likely. They were 21% more likely to score in the game after not scoring. So they were 21% more likely to blank and then score in the next game. So all of this implies that a hot hand effect doesn't exist within this data set. And you could argue on this basis that it doesn't exist in football in a meaningful statistical sense. So when we talk about form, goal scoring form, and we see a player score in one match and we expect him to be more likely to score in the next match, is actually the opposite.
No, it's interesting that you've got, I guess it's such a low scoring game, isn't it, football? I mean, you've compared, obviously, other sports you've mentioned there, basketball, very high scoring game. So I'm not particularly surprised by that. They're 20% more likely to blank after scoring. I'm, again, not surprised that you've got 21%, quite a low percent chance of them scoring after a blank, after scoring in the first game. So score, blank, score. And I mean, I think that is why things that stick in the memory, like Vardy scoring that huge streak, like lots of Michu going on that run when he was tearing it up, those things are so rare. That's why they stick in mind. There's availability. It's not really about that being a commonplace thing.
What I think is going on here, so talking about the representativeness heuristic, so how representative is a streak is of appearing random or non-random, and we said, well, that doesn't really fit with the data that we've got here. I think it's something similar. I think that we all have certain reference points in our mind, and we're always comparing things to those reference points. So for example, in a different context, if you gave £100 to a homeless person and £100 to a billionaire, they'd react very differently. But it's £100 in both cases. How you feel about it changes, depending on the context on what it's compared to. And so I think what is happening here is, with the player who is scoring, that people are comparing to various things. So after the first instance, the first match after they've scored, that fact that they scored in their last game is very, very salient in their minds. And so that's very convincing for them that they're likely to score in this next match. However, the longer that streak goes on, the more difficult it is to believe that it will continue to go on, because our experience of long goal scoring streaks are quite small. quite low. We don't see them very often. We don't see goal scoring streaks of people scoring 5 games, 6 games in a row very often. And so we start to, the thing that we're comparing it to, the reference point that we're comparing it to, is now our memory of goal scoring streaks. As a result, the longer that streak went on, the less faith people had in the hot hand effect. With the non-scoring streak, you removed a non-scoring game, but at that point, people weren't comparing that player to the previous game. They were comparing that player to his performance in the previous season, where he did really well. So, in that context, removing a game, a blanking game, actually makes it more likely in people's minds that he will score in the next game. However, as that non-scoring streak continues, that non-scoring streak becomes the reference point that is most salient and most important to people when they're making their decisions. And from a FPL perspective, I think this is quite interesting because we work with those reference points all the time. We're constantly influenced by how a player played in the last match, how a player played last season, how a player played in their last few matches. How long we expect a streak to realistically continue for, other things unrelated, like for example how a player played in the same fixture last season or earlier on in the season, or whether a player reminds us of another player that we've seen in the past, things like that. So I think what is important is that when you're making these decisions, and particularly when you have a gut feeling about something in FPL, that you really think about what it is that's causing that feeling to occur and how legitimate it is. Because we work on these kind of rules of thumb. Suarez always does really well against Norwich, things like that. But when you actually dig into the data below them, a lot of the time, they're not backed up, by objective data. They're kind of subjective rules of thumb that we kind of create for ourselves to make the decision-making process more easy. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Simon. I think certainly we've seen some cases in the last couple of weeks with Son, for instance. He actually blanked for 5 game weeks in a row, but there were myriad of factors involved in that, wasn't there? And obviously we saw, looking at who they were playing next, West Brom brought a lot of focus this last game week, and a lot of managers making that decision over whether to bring Son in. Should we be looking at his past performances those last 5 game weeks where he hadn't done particularly well, or the fact that he had ultimately the best fixture in the league, the plum home game against West Brom, and the same with Salah as well. To be honest, to a certain extent, a lot of people selling him because of some of those dodgy performances, but not factoring the reality that he'd actually had a couple of offside goals. He was still the penalty taker in the team, the top scorer in the league. All these kind of elements that you said. Actually, people saying sell Salah, he's out of form. He's going through a bad patch. When reality is we know he's actually a certain standard and can deliver, and that made that sort of Son Salah switcheroo sort of transfer from last week particularly tough for me.
Yeah, well, one of the things I think that really came through to me from this study is I don't think that conclusively we can say from this study that goal scoring form doesn't exist, but I think that we can say that we exaggerate its effect, or our belief in it is exaggerated. Decisions that we make in FPL really come down to 2 things: form or fixtures. And when we're talking about goal scoring, if the data suggests that actually one of the big things that we base our decisions on, how a player performed in his previous match, whether or not he scored, actually isn't a very accurate basis for making that decision, then our decisions are always going to be very inefficient on that basis. So I think that we probably do need to look at things in a little bit more detail, and look at some of these wider contextual factors, like you were saying. Who is the opposition? Is it a good fixture? Things like even formation that you're playing against. Whether they're weak on the left hand side or the right hand side. Things like this. This is probably the level that you have to get to in order to genuinely make rational predictions in FPL.
Cool. So quite a lot of detail surrounding Gambler's Fallacy in hot hand there, but basically it's definitely something that's worth bearing in mind when you're making your decisions. It's okay to believe form exists, but context is probably widely required to ground that form in a sense of understanding of the other things that could be feeding into why or why not that is continuing to go on. As Simon said, 20% of the time, they're 20% more likely to blank after scoring a player in Simon's study. An interesting kind of a number to bear in mind there. Let's move on to loss aversion. Loss aversion is quite a topical one, I think, over the last few weeks because of the high EO captains which have been permeating the captain choices. But loss aversion is basically the idea that losses are more keenly felt than gains. Fear is a very strong emotion, I suppose, which drives a lot of behavior, none more so than in loss aversion. And we tend to focus more as human beings on setbacks than on progress. An easy way to think of this is benching. So somebody who loses 10 points for a benching mishap will feel that bit worse compared to how satisfied an equivalent person is through getting a 10-pointer off the bench. So you feel much worse about a bad thing happening when you do feel good about a good thing happening. And this actually links to the endowment effect, which you've written on the side as well a little bit. I mean, how do you think this relates to FPL?
Well, I think from a loss aversion perspective, there's a few different ways that it can affect us. And one of them, I think, is that we won't take action for fear of losing out. As you said, people tend to fear losses more than they value gains. So we find ourselves reticent to transfer out a player who we feel might punish us, even if there are objectively better options to transfer that player to. And as a result, we end up with these players in our team, longer than perhaps we should, or we miss out on better opportunities. But there are other ways, like you say. One of them is benching. So we actually avoid having good players on the bench because they might score more than our starting players, and that is psychologically difficult for us to deal with. Even refusing to cut our losses. So if, for example, you transferred out Son and it turned out that was a mistake because Son just suddenly started scoring, loss aversion would probably cause you to be more reticent about bringing him back in because it confirms the mistake in a way. It confirms that loss. While you don't have Son and you still have the player that you replace him with, there's still a chance that could turn out to be the right decision. But this might not be a rational way of looking at it. The rational thing is, okay, if Son emerges as clearly the better option, then I should swallow my pride and just bring him back in, even if it means that I have to accept the fact that I had made a mistake with previous transfers, and that is really the power of loss aversion, to affect our decisions when playing FPL.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like the fact that kind of is very, very close. In fact, kind of pretty parallel to sunk cost fallacy as well with that Son selling example. Like, you don't want to lose out on the kind of the mental thought process you put into making a sale like that. You want to stick to your plan. You don't want to, have gone through all that for nothing, as it were. So you may see a lot of people kind of sticking to their guns, saying, "Oh, I've made that decision now. I'm going to stick with it." Other impacts of loss aversion, you get loads of moaners on FPL Twitter who you believe would be in the millions, but in fact in the top 10k. It just shows how loss aversion can impact behaviours. People are like, "Oh, that one thing's gone really badly for me this week," and they'll be moaning about that, and you think, "Oh, they must have been terribly." Look at their rank, no, they're in top 5k or so. They're just complaining about the one thing that's happened to them. I guess loss expectancy is something there too, like the idea of projected loss, which means that our actions get driven by negative emotions in FPL. And as I've mentioned, captaincy is a key one there. And it feeds nicely back into pod 22, the effective ownership pod, because we fear the losses of the anticipated high EO pick banging. Herd mentality, of course, would be a nice sort of link in here too, meaning that few of us are brave enough, I guess, to stick our heads above the parapet and go for less captained option. So think of game week 20 when everyone was on Bruno, absolutely everybody, against Sheffield United, and Cancelo captain has got a lovely 34 points. And I think it's 1% of people who did that compared to us Bruno owners with our 4. I guess at the time we all agreed, on the podcast that it was a good idea to go with Bruno, and post-rationalising is always a dangerous road, yada, yada. But maybe loss aversion is something we need to overcome, and maybe something that late risers upside chasing may inadvertently, on his end, of course, be the antidote to. Nick, any recent examples of loss aversion? I've given a couple there.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the James Justin effect to a certain extent. When we were talking about loss aversion, someone who I sold in game week 5, and I've never really wanted to bring him back in because I just know the damage that he's caused me so far this season. So sort of returning to James Justin is almost sickening after the sort of the last 20 or so game weeks where he's kept turning up with 9-pointers and 15-pointers. But I certainly think, as engaged managers, we can be driven by that fear, I guess, of what happens if we don't own or even captain that specific player. And it has led up to these scenarios where we're all just like really sort of with the same players, aren't we? These very template picks, likes of Bruno's, the likes of Salah's, the likes of Bamford's. I mean, I don't own Bamford, but I can imagine, looking at his sort of 88% effective ownership in the top 100k or whatever it was this particular game week, that many managers who own him would be very concerned about selling him just because of the impact he had. And then I think I had that a little bit actually to my detriment early on in the season when I hung on to Dominic Calvert-Lewin for a little bit too long, just because I knew that as soon as I sold this guy, I'd be afraid of the other 60% or so at the time of managers in the top 100k, the engaged managers that own this guy, and the fact that he could easily punish me. So I just ended up committing to this chap who wasn't delivering at the time.
It's definitely one of those where it is about falling prey to fear, isn't it? And maybe for FPL managers, it should be about keeping mindful of not falling to that fear when it comes to captains at times, or not falling prey to fear when you're thinking about the transfer you're going to make. And maybe there is always that sort of element of chasing the upside, but I guess in recent weeks, because I've been so pummeled by not owning a couple of individual players, I'm now thinking of going the other way. But I mean, particularly for this week, talking about that just now has given me a couple of ideas which I may explore in a little bit in the question section. And the final bit is satisfying and maximizing in decision making. So this is very much around decision making styles, which I always find really interesting as like a nice little contrast between two camps of individuals. The first one we'll call the less engaged, what Nick would call the casual, and the other one would be the engaged, i.e. us. Yeah. So satisfying as a decision-making style is very much that'll do. It's a kind of casual way of thinking. So you'd say, all right, I need to replace X in my team. What someone who is satisfying would do would look through and see who has the most points in that price range and pretty much confirm, job done. We see this so often in market forces, all the way back to the amazing example of Stephen Ward at Burnley rising from 4.5 to 5.3 a couple of years ago. Just he got a dodgy assist and a dodgy goal. Suddenly, every time there was a 4.5 million defender out, he was brought in. Ditto Vestergaard seems to rise up 0.5 million every season because he gets a couple of goals. Suddenly, everybody's away. In contrast, maximizing. So this is what most engaged managers do to help them with decision making, which is examining far more sources of data, listening to podcasts, reading articles, canvassing opinions on Twitter, analyzing data to help come to their conclusions. You'll see this all the time. The contrast between people who are satisfying, decision made early, I'm off, the people who who've already made their transfers now, despite the fact there's FA Cup stuff to come, versus people like us who will bifurcate, worry all week before invariably making a decision that feels a bit like a middle of the road compromise unless you're really, really good. For me, this is a really interesting distinction because in life, I'm a satisficer. Like my instincts surrounding things are normally very good and I'm happy to just trust them. Like I don't really do deep research about it very much. Like I'll get what I need to know and I'll move on. It really upsets my girlfriend because she's a maximizer. Like she needs to understand every avenue. She needs to understand absolutely everything. For example, we're moving at the moment or in the process of it. And she's like, have you found a moving company yet? And I'm just like, yeah, I found one. She's like, well, have you compared it to other ones? No, not really. Like, this one looks all right. It does the job. And that enrages her. But for some reason, the scale of my engagement maybe means that the sole exception to that satisfies personality is FPL, where I examine all the possibilities nowadays and to come to my conclusions. Maybe it's because we kind of consciously make a podcast which tries to ensure we're covering all of the angles, but it tends to mean I get analysis paralysis and basically screw up. Like the last 3 years, my ranks have been average at best. I'm on course for a fourth. So maybe I do need to go back to Satisifying just to stop the noise a bit. But yeah, no, very interesting sort of contrast in the way people think. Simon, what do you think about these two and how they impact people in terms of FPL?
Well, I think it's quite interesting because there is a study, I believe, that I've seen that shows that maximizers typically make better choices, but satisficers enjoy their choices more.
Like that.
And part of that is that they spend less time, making those decisions, and they create less stress in making that choice. So it really depends what outcome you are looking for. If you're looking for the perfect outcome or the ideal outcome, then maximizing, as the name would suggest, is possibly the way to go. But if you're looking to just kind of enjoy yourself, then satisficing is more appropriate. In the context of FPL, there's probably something in between that. It's possible to overthink things. I mean, we definitely know that this is true. You can look at too many sources of data when making a decision. And I think one of the things that you kind of establish if you've been playing FPL for a while is what is your most important criteria when looking at a player. And if you can narrow that down to just a handful of things, it makes your life a lot easier. And it also makes you, less likely to make some fairly sort of wayward or random decisions. Much as we all like data, and we talk about data on these podcasts and things, and we like to see kind of insightful things about teams that struggle on corners and teams that versus teams that are good in the air. They're probably not the most important things, and actually when you look at it statistically, they have very, very little influence over the course of a season. However, when you're going down one of these FPL rabbit holes, it's very easy to allow that kind of microscopic insight or data to completely influence your decision, and not always for the best.
Yeah, I think certainly as engaged managers, we can fall foul of over-analysing our decisions. I mean, we look at so many different facets, don't we? From analysing a whole host of data, as you highlighted, looking at heat maps, stats like XG and XGI, or even like, press conferences are slightly off comments from a manager like Pep Guardiola, and, a whole of Twitter's jumped on it, or, everyone's analysing the training photographs that have been posted on Instagram, or looking at, ridiculous things like boots and bib theory and all of that sort of crazy stuff that it can go a bit crazy sometimes online, obviously, especially during the week when he's got his fallow periods of no matches. But I think ultimately it does work out sometimes. We can identify those gems every so often as engaged managers, like we've seen with likes of picking up on a sort of a 4.4 million Matt Doherty for Wolves, thanks to very impressive underlying stats, or identifying a 4 million out of position player like John Lundstrom that many people noticed in pre-season, thanks to some good pre-season form. So we do get some wins, at least in terms of the community, that give us an edge over certain managers. But I think certainly the majority of people that play FPL don't spend all day analysing the decisions. You get these managers that perhaps would have just looked at the start of the season and targeted Patrick Bamford for 5.5 million starting forwards, he's cheap, he'll do, straight into my team. But the engaged manager might have been caught out at this moment in time, thinking, we all know about Bamford, his records in the Championship, the fact that he was snatching hundreds of chances, wasn't really putting them away for Leeds.
Doing a paddy.
His previous experience in the Premier League at Middlesbrough, as you said, doing a paddy, not doing anything. And before you know it, you've got these guys who've had Patrick Bamford at the start and completely smashing it. And the same with Son and Kane, actually, to a certain extent. There were a lot of people on Twitter saying the likes of Bruno was overperforming his XG, the likes of Son and Kane were overperforming XG, not getting these guys in, sort of head in the sand type attitudes to a certain extent. We linked in with sunk cost fallacy, which you referenced, I think, earlier, Tom. And, a lot of analytics on that sort of thing. And this can cause managers to fall prey, I guess, to their own psychological biases, where they're reliant on one form of stat and perhaps not looking at the bigger picture in mind. And whilst the casual managers had Son, Kane, Bamford at the start of this season, not really caring and sitting at sort of 10k overall rank.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we seen that you'd be like, Oh, if you weren't watching FPL Twitter on the day before and you'd seen all the rumours of blah blah's injured. Oh, he's not been in training photos. Oh, I've just transferred out blah blah because he hasn't been there. Next day, oh, blah blah starts, and you hear people going, oh no, I was caught out by that. Oh, I can't believe that he wasn't in training. Oh, I believed in so and so's rumour. Like a lot of the time, as Simon said, and as you're alluding to there, Nick, this information overload can be something which absolutely takes you over. Hearing on people's opinions on top of that, and to your point, Simon, about having those sources that you particularly trust. Like, I think I had too many sources that I trusted who all told me two different things over the last few years, and it's really hurt me. I used to be a decent manager just through kind of the idea of satisfying and just kind of thinking, okay, that's a good choice, that will do. I still have that instinct, and something I lost sight on this year a little bit just is kind of capturing my gut. So write down as a nudge to myself kind of what my initial thoughts were about the game week, which I need to do again actually. But yeah, I often find that the best managers are those who are capable of being kind of quite single-minded in terms of what they do. I'm sure you do that, and I'm sure Nick definitely does that. Will not tell us anything until the day and be like, oh yeah, I've just done this, just a random move that ends up kind of evincing 15 points or so for him. So I think overall it's just something that I need to be mindful of in terms of how I make decisions, and maybe kind of guard against that kind of general load of management. And speaking of general, FPL General, good example of a player who has kind of just cut out a lot of the noise this season, stuck to his own guns. And even though I do love interacting on Twitter, maybe it's time to pull it back. So anyway, quite an interesting kind of voyage through a little bit of behavioural science there for you guys. Just to sum up again, hot hand fallacy, Gamber's fallacy. This is the idea that streaks either do or don't continue, depending on your point of view. We kind of came to a conclusion, maybe to do some research, zoom into it and look at it rather than taking the streak as read, be that a streak that someone is scoring or someone isn't scoring. Loss aversion, check yourself. Is that what's stopping you from kind of making the best decision you can be making? Is it that? And obviously there's the insular thing of sunk cost fallacy that we've kind of referenced a little bit in between. And satisfying versus maximizing. Maximizers, as Simon put it, make better decisions. Satisfiers enjoy their choices more. I just feel like I'd rather enjoy my choices rather than agonize over them as a maximizer and always see what could have been. But anyway, hope that was interesting. We'll take a break there and move on to the Q&A after this, which includes, of course, looking at chip strategies.
Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
So we're back, and it's time to catch up with the Who Got the Assist mini league. As I said earlier, and if you want to join the league, the code is cpsulf. So I'll do a quick rundown of the top 5, maybe actually the top 6, seeing as there's 2 people on the same score. It's all very congested in the league at the moment, but tied on 1559 is David Izzet with Hestwam untied, and the ace team, Wallace Clark, both on 1559. Decent weeks for both of those guys, but red arrows, unfortunately. And in 4th, it's Ryan Hobbs, got 72 points, very nice score, rising up. And friend on Twitter, Alan Cooper, 71 points for him. He's gone all the way up to 3rd. And rounding up the top 2, we've got Ben Connor with Connorman FC in 2nd. And number 1 is Ryan Longstaff with Wakandon Wanderers. He got 59 points, so not the highest score this week, but overall rank 67. So he should be very pleased with that score. That's excellent.
Wakanda forever. Yep, holding on. Well done. Right, no correspondence this week, but it will return next week, I promise. I'm not trying to kill it off in Anthony's absence. We do have questions to be looked over in this section. And to make Anthony the happiest man in all of the island of Ireland, it's whogottheassist@gmail.com. Right, and whatever you want, poems, treatises, lengthy arguments with Simon on behavioural science, whatever you want to do, please do, and we will eventually get around to reading it. I know that there's quite a few currently to be waited on because we had all of those midweeks that we didn't feel it was a good time to be throwing out correspondence just because it would, it's 24 hours and it's gone. That's not good if you bothered to write in. So we'll definitely be bringing that back next week and be working through the backlog. So apologies, bear with us. We will be there very, very soon. Another reason why it's fortuitous Anthony's not here and he's on the toilet this evening is the Q&A, predominantly because the top thing in the Q&A is chip strategy. Of course, we don't yet know all of the game week 26 fixtures. which means that next week we're definitely going to be foregrounding this, talking on this through. But we felt that this week it was okay to have this in the Q&As rather than being kind of top of the agenda, just because there are a few things up in the air. But nonetheless, questions are beginning to be asked. Chip Paradox on Twitter asks, what's the play going forward? He's got wildcard and bench boost remaining, but how we think of navigating things. Karam Tizer also asked a similar question. He actually asked us if there's any scope for different strategies. He says he's bench boosting in game week 24, so the one just coming with West Ham, particularly against Sheffield United, being the bench of his team. Just played 120 minutes, but I guess they've got a Monday game. And he says, other players have okay games this week. Then he's going to wildcard into 26 and kind of use go chippers for the rest of the year. So there are quite a few strategies there. But I guess fixtures permitting, chips permitting, where are we at and what are our strategies, guys? I mean, Simon, where are you in terms of what chips you have left and what you think of doing over the next little while?
Well, I've only got my bench boost left. So I'm slightly apathetic about the upcoming double game weeks. I really just want to kind of get through them. I've done a reasonably good job, I think, of getting in advance the kind of main players, main danger players. The likes of Man City attacking assets, Calvert-Lewin. I've got Danny Ings for game week 25 when they double. And I've got a couple of transfers to help sort me out going into this week. So I think I actually also considered bench boosting this week, partly due to the fact that I have Anguissa of Fulham, who's currently on my bench, and it did cross my mind that maybe I could get something from that, but. What I would say is I think lots of people are going to approach this with lots of different strategies, and the information is going to change as more information comes out. I think one of the mistakes that I made was moving too quickly on earlier decisions, thinking okay, well, one in the hand is worth two in the bush. It turns out that it wasn't worth it at all. But I think the overarching advice I would give is one, wait and see how the FA Cup fixtures turn out, because we should find out more information about which teams are going to double going forward, and hopefully when. But also, if you are wildcarding, don't dead end your team into one of these double game weeks just for the sake of a double game week. Otherwise, or at least in my experience, you'll probably end up undoing all the good work of those double game weeks in the following game weeks of trying to get your team back to some sort of semblance of respectability.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, there's that free hit, which some people may have. Game week 29 is looking like the free hit game week, as it is tonight. West Ham and Arsenal have been confirmed as being a game no longer the Leeds game, so it's beginning to kind of take shape already. But as I said, we'll see what it looks like when it comes down to it. I've got wildcard and bench boost left, and I, like you, Simon, have been looking at potentially bench boosting this week. The thing is that I want more information before I make that sort of final decision. But the way I'm looking at it really is that later on, when it comes to game 25 and game 26, and as I said at the top, in terms of why the last two games have been so bad for me, is that I need to probably stanch a lot of the bleeding when it comes to certain players I don't own, namely the likes of Kane, Son, and Justin, who may coincidentally also have a good double game week in that big 26. So boringly, inevitably, it looks like I'm basically looking at wildcarding to a semi-decent template in the game week 25, setting up for the bench boost in 26 and managing it out from there, which means I'm looking at a punt this week, which is quite cool for this week's game week 24, but really it is, as I said, all kind of fueled by the fact that I feel a little bit like I've got to just bite the bullet and kind of pay attention perhaps to the loss aversion that I've been trying to ignore when it comes to the likes of Kane, Son and Justin, because it just can't continue that these guys, whenever they do anything, are absolutely pummeling my rank. You can't have them all, obviously, but sometimes it is good to just kind of repair and make sure that downside is fully protected, especially where I am.
I'm going for a similar strategy to what you said as well. I think I'm probably going to use the wild card in 25 and then prep my team, make it as good as possible for the bench boost where all the double game weeks are going to be happening in 26. So I think, obviously, as we said, it's hard to suggest any form of discernible strategy for sure, because obviously, we don't know the full machinations of what's actually happening in that double game week. But we know at least for next week, there's a double imminent for Burnley, Fulham, Everton and Manchester City. So I'll be looking at a few characters from that team. I think we've got a question on that coming up anyway. And 26 is going to be the big double game week of the season as per Ben Crellin. So at least that's the one that I'm going to be looking at for my bench boost and for my wildcard team, trying to make it as strong as possible for that particular one. There is, as you said, the fawn in the plan, which is the blank in 29, which we're going to have to potentially navigate. So this is kind of where those people who have held on to their free hit have a little bit of an advantage. And ultimately, at this point, I still don't have mine, considering how much of a damp squib that game week was. But ultimately, I think, that's the kind of plan, but I'm just kind of waiting for a little bit more information, at least until I kind of really, nail down that plan.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense. Yeah, I suppose it's always going to be about navigating it as best you can with the resources you have. And I think, Simon, what he said about just trying to make sure that you don't blow it all for one game week and then find yourself scrabbling to correct yourself the next is really, really important. Right, and I guess the upcoming double game week 24 for a few teams is next in focus. So Kulamo Kunale at Cullum on Twitter, I apologise for butchering your name, jokingly asks about James Justin. Will he ever stop scoring points? Yeah, I know, bloody James Justin. But he makes a wider point as well about essential players. Who would we label as this for double game week 24? I guess mainly the Burnley defence, who we've got a question on in a minute, will come through, the likes of Pope, obviously, and one more. Unfortunately, I bought Ben Mee this week, who almost gave away a penalty. It will be pretty standard. I guess bet one of the City defenders, if not two. I think top 10k over two City defenders will be through the roof. Gundogan, auto include, I think, top point scorer in the last 6, ludicrous value, probably a potential long-term keep now. I got him at 5.5, he's now 6, hooray. And Bruno, perhaps one, and maybe one more for United, but they just play 120 minutes, and they've also got a very tough Sociedad game coming up. And also DCL, who's been bought again in droves. Is that kind of the list you go for there, Simon? Are these players in your team? Are you looking to bring a player in?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly the list that I have. I agree with Gundogan. It's an interesting one. This is a manifestation of loss aversion in practice, because I've actually got Sterling, and I'm looking at bringing Gundogan in. And the question then is, who do I captain? Because if I really wanted to make up ground, I would probably go for Sterling. But more likely, I'm going to chicken out and go for Gundogan like everybody else. So yeah, but I think this week I feel like it has a Nick Pope Hall written all over it. So if you can get him in, brilliant. If you can't, then there are some pretty good value Burnley defenders, like me and Loughton. But yeah, I think you pretty much covered them. Everton obviously have some decent options, but one of their matches is pretty tough, and because it's against City, and the other one is against Fulham, who themselves have been no mugs in the last couple of months. So I don't know if I'd be loading up on them, but I do have Calvert-Lewin myself, and I'm obviously holding on to him.
Yeah, I think for me, Calvert-Lewin, he is looking pretty essential for this particular game week, starting to find his form again. And that Fulham fixture is worth highlighting as particularly tasty. I'm also looking at other Everton assets as well. I think there's a few other options. Perhaps they're not essential, but I think, you could look at a double up in Everton for sure for this particular game week, even though they do have one tougher fixture. They've got one very nice one as well. With Manchester City, you talked a lot about Gundogan. I'm not going to say he's essential because I don't actually own him, but I think it's about triple Manchester City, isn't it? And I've got Sterling like you, Simon, and he's going to be one of my key players, one of my key differentials, hopefully for next week. And I've also got Diaz and Stones, but the likes of Cancelo, obviously a fantastic pick as well. I think it's just about picking 3 from 5, really, from the City boys for the next week. And even a few others, Foden started to appear on the market forces as well. Certainly another pick that looks like a good one, but unfortunately we can only own 3 Manchester City players. Otherwise, we probably have about 5 or 6 by now in our teams just because of their performances. But I think in terms of the double, we always worry a little bit about rotation with City. I'd probably say Diaz and Gundogan probably the safest picks of them all. So maybe even captain the centre back for the double game week. Bell Banger actually asked a question about this. He said, "Are we overstating Burnley for the upcoming double game week in the context of many years of us taking chances of teams who happen to have good double game weeks on paper but aren't performing well?" You know, the classic Duffy triple captain turned out pretty diabolically, didn't it? And that was a famous case. I think I captained him. At least I didn't triple captain some managers. But you know, with Burnley, I'm actually gonna skip him, to be honest. I'm not gonna go for them. I know you've been heavily championing Ben Mee. I'm not convinced, to be honest, especially after that last performance. But I actually quite like Nick Pope. If I was to pick one Burnley player for my team, it would be Nick Pope. I mean, you know, looking at Burnley, their defence hasn't been great, let's be honest. They're the 4th worst in the league for shots on target conceded. But it's about Nick Pope, isn't it? He saved 86 of the 130 shots. Only Johnston has saved more shots, and his 79.4% save rate is the best of all the active goalkeepers, far superior than the likes of De Gea, who's got a dreadful save percentage of only 62.7%. There's a few others out there, really low percentages, but Nick Pope's been an absolute amazing goalkeeper. Should be starting for England if his distribution perhaps was a little bit better. I don't know. But I think the challenge for me with Pope is Emi Martinez. Just been excellent as well, hasn't he? And he's got that home fixture against Brighton, so just got another 9-pointer. So if I had a crap goalkeeper, I feel like Pope would be a shoo-in. But with Martinez, I don't know. So maybe I'm going to skip Pope. I think if you're bench boosting like you're thinking, Tom, then maybe a Pope Martinez combo would be fantastic for the goalkeepers.
Yeah, no, I think I would. If I was bench boosting, I definitely do Pope. That's for sure. A bit Fulham and Crystal Palace for a double game week, as Nick referenced, that is double game week 34 a couple of years ago. Brighton, Bournemouth, and Cardiff, 2 home games in a row. It really has that stink about it, doesn't it? And as Nick mentioned, Shane Duffy, 2 points out of those 2 games, even captained himself famously on Fantasy Football that week. I mean, what with Burnley, are they the new Brighton? Without knowing what the result is, it's worth mentioning for the tough run before they've come onto our radar here. They had United, West Ham, Liverpool, Villa, Chelsea, and City, and they also had very, very respectable wins over Liverpool and Villa in that run. But I guess kind of looking to remember the question from the other week from John O'Forward in the correspondence about how we frame data, we've really got to consider how poor Burnley's defence has been in the last 6, but also why, because of those games. Over the last 6, Burnley's defence, it's been really bad. They've conceded the most shots on target. They've conceded the most shots. And I guess a little bit worryingly for them, they've also conceded the most shots in the box. So it's really important to remember that Burnley as a team allow a lot of shots. And that is why Pope gets lots of saves. But an unusually high amount of shots in the box is a cause of concern in spite of those people that they've played, because normally the likes of Tarko and me would be the ones clearing those, blocking those, intercepting those, the CBI kings. So maybe there is a case that they're letting more shots at goal at the moment than they normally would. But equally, it's a good double game week, and odds are that Burnley are able to at least whistle out a clean sheet of those 2. And as Simon said, there's lots of really cheap looking. There's reasonably priced, I guess, assets within that Claret's backline. Even though lots of Lowson at 4.5, just as like a cursory sort of Pope cover if you needed to, could do the job. I think I'm probably going to. I've got Ben Mee, and I may well get one more actually if I'm looking to wildcard next week. I'm taking one week punt. I don't think I'm going to move Martinez, same as you, Nick. So I might end up getting Lowton in just as a bit of a cover. Simon, what do you think about the Burnley defence?
Yeah, I think it's hard to look beyond the Burnley defence as options for this game week. But like I said, obviously big fan of Pope. Not only have they got a really good double game week in Crystal Palace away and Fulham at home, but one of the important things I think about Burnley is they've also got a really good fixture in 25 with West Brom at home. So looking at those, that could be 3 clean sheets in a row. And for those of us who aren't wildcarding in 25, Burnley is actually, a team that you can bring in their players and sit on them a bit. After that, their run does get a little bit tougher, but they also, sometimes tend to do better against the bigger teams. And like you say, it's the cost efficiency of them. Could be really beneficial at this stage of the season when we're trying to load up on some of the bigger attacking players.
I guess we've got so much money at the moment, though. It doesn't particularly matter to some extent. But no, I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, it never lasts long, though, does it?
No, absolutely not. It's just that point of the season, isn't it, when things are a bit up in the air. Speaking of which, if it is in vogue to wildcards in 25, suddenly we do have one-hit punts galore. Hooray! We all love that kind of final dance with your team before you wildcard, that final one kind of game week wonder. And Ulysses FPL is right on the bottom of the question here. He says, he's looking for basically punts around that. I mean, he specifically is looking for a midfielder, but we might as well do the gamut here. Any sort of 1 week punts that we can think of. I've got kind of 3 that I'm going to mention, if that's all right. And then I'll maybe go to you, Nick, first after that. But my 3 are Luke Shaw from Manchester United, didn't play tonight, but he's fourth. Well, I think he came on the 90th minute of 120, something like that. But he's one I'm very interested in if I was taking one hit 1 week punt against West Brom, a team that have conceded 3 goals per game under the manager that they've got. He's created the most chances, the most big chances, and has the highest XA of all defenders in the last 6 game weeks. This is Luke Shaw, people, big old Luke Shaw. In midfield, Raheem Sterling. Hooray. I'm thinking of joining you guys on the wagon, shockingly. I think he's a bit overlooked after getting back-to-back 8-point returns, had a break, and then he got 11s before that. He's had the most shots in the box, the second most big chances, and he's scored the 4th highest points amongst mids in the last 6 games. Gundogan's been stealing his sort of fire, but I think he's a great low percentage captaincy pick for the double game week, and I think he's the one that I'm looking to bring in and captain where I am, 500k. I think that's a good idea. Obviously, if you're doing well, Gundogan, do it, forget about it. But I really like that. And finally, Ollie Watkins, single game week player again, but he's top of all the metrics over the last 6 for a striker. So I think that if you are looking for a striker to replace, for example, with Antonio's Crocs, he could be the one that I'd be looking at. Nick, what do you reckon? Those 3?
Yeah, Luke Shaw was one of the ones that I called out as well. As you said, some of the attacking stats are particularly impressive. Passed the eye test with my dad as well, who texted me to say that Luke Shaw looked like a decent pick for FPL. So just on watching the game. So yeah, I think he's certainly one to call out. West Brom away, and surely that's a clean sheet for United, and definitely a chance of some attacking returns as well with his form. The other 2 I called out actually were just some Everton players. So one that's potentially coming in for me is Luca Dean, and he's had 7 assists in 13 games over the course of the season. So he's been doing really well in terms of some of the attacking stats, also impressing in terms of the underlying stats as well, chance creation, etc. Everton, as we know, have Fulham home as part of their double. And the other one was another Everton pick we haven't mentioned, which is James Rodriguez. So he's back in the team. Started off, really impressively at the start of the season. He was kind of like in majority of our teams after that excellent rich vein of form. At the start of the season, but obviously he dropped off the radar a little bit with the injury, but he was back last game week, scored a goal. Certainly one to keep an eye on, especially if you're looking for someone sort of around that mid-price, mid-range. What about yourself, Simon? Who's on your radar, at least for 1 week punts?
Agree with those. I mean, there's always the possibility of looking at the likes of Mahrez and Foden at Man City. If you want to take that risk. I think possibly it's a good week to look at a Chelsea player. They've got Newcastle at home. I think Mason Mount is probably the most nailed on one, and I mean he's right up at the top of the charts in terms of chances created. Obviously, he scored in the last match as well. So yeah, he could be good for a 1 week punt. If you don't have the money for Mount, you could go for Jorginho, who's scored 2 penalties in 2 matches, and that might not be as random as it appears, given the types of players that Chelsea currently have. Are fast and difficult to mark, and so it's very easy for them to win penalties at the moment, it seems. One sort of real left field one, I think this is mostly for people looking to bench boost, is possibly Areola at Fulham. And Fulham, as we discussed, got Everton and Burnley at home. I think double game weeks often, sort of unfashionable goalkeepers tend to do very well in double game weeks. At least, that's my recollection. And he's cheap enough that if you are bench boosting, that you can then stick him on your bench for the rest of the season. Although I will point out that Fulham themselves have got Sheffield United at home in 25 and Crystal Palace away in 26. So he might be more than a game week 24 punt, but. I think not saying that he's captain material, but I think that he's a potentially interesting choice for a differential this week.
Oh, absolutely, Areola, the cheapest playing goalkeeper. Good call. Let's hope it doesn't go tits up for you if you go with that. And the final question this week is bench woes. So we're obviously not immune to the facts that I benched Souček and DCL the last couple of weeks, so I know exactly how you feel. General Zod, who asked this question, he asked, how are we feeling about bench points and their continuing pummeling of us? How is that affecting our decision making? Simon, what are you doing? Is it something which has happened for you a fair bit, and how are you kind of dealing with kind of the impacts of that?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, I had a target on my bench this week, which was 7 points. I know that people have had much worse, but it's always annoying whenever you bench a player. I've avoided it for the most part this season because I have gone with a very sort of cheap bench strategy. But I kind of get why it's annoying, especially. If you have a player on your bench who kind of outscores the rest of your team, or your bench outscores, your playing team, which has happened to me, more than once. That's really annoying. But I do think it is just annoying. I think if you reframe it and say, okay, bench points, that highlights a strength of your team. If you're scoring points from your bench, or if your bench players are scoring points, that suggests that you've actually got quite a strong squad. And so you could take it as a positive. So whilst it's annoying, it's not necessarily something that you want to avoid, and not really something that you can avoid. If you're making logical decisions, based on whatever criteria you use to make these decisions, and you end up with some points on the bench, that really is the game. I think we would probably do more damage by trying to avoid it. Anyway, that's just my view on the subject.
There was a really good piece on Fantasy Hub by FPL Woodsy this week, which was similar to that. He said, he doesn't understand how people get annoyed about their benches, because a good bench tends to show your team is quite healthy, So rationally, as you've been inferring, don't worry about it. It's a good decision to do whatever you did, I'm sure. And we're in a very unique time at the moment, if we've spoken about, where there'll be more bench points than normal, right? I totally get the rationale behind it, but I hate it. I really hate it. I hate the cognitive torture of knowing I've got a player on the bench who can score big every week. And the worst has happened over the last couple of weeks. Maybe that is just, availability heuristic, because recent stuff that's happened to me, it's salient, so it's killing me. But you know what? I don't want the option of that happening. I really don't. I just don't like it. I don't mind having, a 4.5 million holding or whatever coming off the bench, or a Dawson, but having someone like Souček on my bench, having someone like DCL on my bench, I just don't like it. It makes me feel uncomfortable. It's irrational, I know.
But that's kind of the thing, though, isn't it? Is that if the solution to this is to make your squad weaker, is that a positive step?
It's not about making it weaker. It's more about having someone that you can kind of cognitively identify as being a bench ready player. So I said to Nick last week, my ideal bench is probably going to be 2 4.5 million-ish defenders, and then a piece of crap like, I know, the kind of that meme photo, feel like Pure and just want her back. I feel like I just want Brewster back, so I could stick him third bench, not worry about it, and have my front seven always on the pitch. I'm happy with them. There's never going to be a problem. Like when I wildcard, I think I will try to go back to having a proper bench 100%. I just don't like it. It's like basically, like investing or something like that. You've got to stick to the style that suits you, and I just feel like this one just doesn't suit me. Like having all these sort of points on my bench and having that strong squad. I get what you're saying. I rationally completely understand it, but that kind of two centre backs and cheap forward approach I've previously campaigned for is probably going to mean I avoid someone like having Souček in my team, just so I don't have to try to navigate this and get it wrong, because I don't know. It's just something about it. We've all got our pet peeves, and for me in FPL, having points benched when you had a choice to play that player, whereas if it self-selects in, this is a bench player, it doesn't matter if they come on or not. If they do, great, and if they do well. If they don't, then they would bench anyway. If it's a margin call like a Souček or a DCL, I just don't like it. It just makes me feel very uncomfortable. But that is just me, and I'm aware that it's completely irrational and just personal.
It's very normal though, isn't it? It's the paradox of choice.
Yeah,
it sort of goes back to the satisfying, maximizing thing that. If you don't have to make that decision, you'll feel happier than if you did have to make
That's
that
literally,
decision.
I want the decision out of my hands. Yeah. Nick, what do you reckon here?
So, yeah, I'm probably going to annoy you and a few listeners by boasting about my bench score. So in the last 3 game weeks, I've only actually benched 3 points in total, which is just ridiculous compared to some of the people I've seen who've benched 40 points in one particular game week. So it's just worked out with some of those characters. And the meme example is particularly irrelevant because I do have Brewster on my bench getting that 1 point or 2 points every so often. I've got Tyreek Mitchell, the perfect bench foil, sitting there as well. And I think ultimately, I don't think there's harm in benching points. I think it's frustrating because obviously you have a headache every game week. You have to think about something else as well as your transfers. You have to think about who's going to start week in, week out. At least with myself and my team, I've kind of got a clear idea of who's benched. This particular game week, I actually benched Andrew Robertson, and he got me 0 points, so that kind of worked out pretty well. But I think if you've got these scenarios where you've got 3 starting forwards, you've got Souček as well, it's very, very challenging. I can appreciate the challenge, but that's the thing about having Sterling instead of Gundogan. I spent all my money on my starting 11, so I don't have money for the bench. And I think having these characters, like Ollie Burke or Basuma or Brewster sitting there, I don't think there's any harm with them. And having a 4.5 million defender who can rotate in. So I was rotating Walker Peters and Dallas for quite a chunk of the season. I think that kind of works as a generally an effective strategy, because the starting 11's ultimately meant to be the most important members of your team, and then you should have a clear bench in mind as well. At least that's how I approach it. Cool. So we'll move on anyway, round it up with transfers and captains. So Simon, did you want to start perhaps with your transfers this week and your captain?
Sure. So my captain is going to be one of Sterling or Gundogan. Gundogan will also be my transfer in, probably for Salah, which I don't really want to do, but don't feel I have much alternative at the moment. And then I've got a second transfer, and that's going to be a Burnley player. Could be Nick Pope, in which case I would bench boost, but more likely it'll be Ben Mee.
Oh, Ben Mee. Oh, dear me. Are you sure you want to walk the path of Ben Mee with me? I would not be doing that. Oh, yeah, no, it certainly makes sense. So I'm going to be wildcarding 25. So I am, I think, in Punt's territory. And I think what I'm going to do is do that whole upside chasey thing I've heard so much about. It's going to end in absolute tears, isn't it? Basically, what I'm looking to do is Stones to Lowton. I already have me, so I'll be doubled up on the Burnley defence. That basically is going to mean that my defence for the double game week will be Diaz, me, and Lowton. Maybe I'll be playing Dawson as well if Antonio's not fit, so I have 4 at the back. And I'm because I'm removing a Man City player in defence, that means I can get one in midfield, and that would be Sterling. So I'd be doing Souček to Sterling, and I'd be captaining Sterling. So I'd be kind of going all the way. In addition to data from earlier, a bit of an eye test wanker point. He has looked so much more like the goal scoring Raz that we know and love over the last few weeks, rather than the "whip please guys" Raz that we've seen in the past. And I'm really interested in bringing him in. I think that he's going to be one of those players, because Gundogan is there. He's such amazing value. People are going to be overlooking him as an option. So I think that he's going to be one that I'm hoping, given where I am on 500k, I would not be recommending this if you are doing okay. I think you just consolidate with a Gundogan. Gundogan, for example, is still owned by is only owned by 25% of people, maybe up to 30% by the end of the week. But Raz 12.5, 13%, absolutely worth it, I think, as a comparison in terms of ownership for someone like me who's looking to push it upwards. So that would be my punt, and I'll be wildcarding in 25, I'm almost sure, but let's see what happens with the rearranged fixtures. And finally, Nick, what are your plans for this double game week? I'll be captaining Sterling.
That's really interesting. I think, for me, I was planning a defensive move. So I was looking at Luca Dean as a possible option as a replacement for Robertson or Mitchell. I've got plenty of money in the bank, so I could just do a straight swap there. So that was one thing I was thinking about doing, getting another Everton guy in defence. Thinking about upside chasing, I was just actually eyeing up the possibility of doing Son to Rashford, which would be quite exciting, perhaps. Get on the Rash train for the West Brom game. He could be a really interesting differential as well for the next week. So that's another idea that I've got in my mind. I'm probably not going to take a hit, though. I'm going to try and avoid a hit as much as I can for the rest of the season. So probably just a single move for me. But in terms of the armband, it's probably going to go on either Sterling or Calvert-Lewin. I haven't quite decided. I've been umming and ahhing between the two options, so I'll give that a little bit more thought before I make a executive decision there. Thanks guys for listening. We were Who Got the Assist. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, make sure to do it. And thanks, Simon, for coming on. Very enjoyable. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you again. I think we'll try to make this a yearly thing rather than a biannual thing. I think it's always interesting. There's lots to talk about behavioural science. Well, I try to do it every now and again. Nice to have a focused one. We hope this assisted you think more deeply about the behavioural side of FPL. In any case, speak to you next week. I can't wait to get some sleep on Thursday night for once. But yeah, all the best in double game week 24. And speak to you very soon. Goodbye.
See you guys soon.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?